You might expect old paintings to be worth money, but why is a rickety metal mobile worth more than your house? And who would pay more for an old blanket than a new yacht? Keep watching to find out. A U.S. Air Force vet appeared on the June 1, 2019 episode of Antiques Roadshow in Fargo, North Dakota with a Rolex watch he'd first purchased while stationed in Thailand in the 1970s. It cost him $345.97, the equivalent of a month's salary at the time. He said, "I had other watches I wore and I just put this into a safety deposit box. It stayed there for 30 or 40 years. I only took it out like 2 or 3 times to look at it, and that was about the extent of it before I brought it here. It's worth a lot more than $300 now, though." The appraiser said,
"It's one of the rarest Paul Newman models, and in this condition, I don't think there's a better one in the world."
The auction value? $500,000 to $700,000. The owner of a century-old painting brought it to a San Diego recording of Antiques Roadshow, which aired on June 12, 2010. The woman explained that the piece of art had been passed down through her family. "This lady is my grandmother, and the painting was painted by Robert Henry, a friend of the family." The first appraiser the owner took it to when she inherited the painting in the 1960s didn't think it was impressive. They said it was not worth much more than Grandpa paid for it, and Grandpa paid $4,500. And the reason it's not worth much more is because it's a family portrait, and museums wouldn't want it, and no one else would want it. Still, times and tastes change, especially in the art world, which is why you should always get your valuables appraised regularly. Well, the insurance value given on the show in 2010 was $250,000 to $300,000. A 2016 update increased that to $500,000 to $700,000. The owner of a James Henry Beard painting, The Illustrious Guest, brought it to a Dallas, Texas taping of Antiques Roadshow, which aired on June 28, 2008. Painted in 1847, it depicts Henry Clay, who the appraiser calls, quote, "the most recognizable politician of the 19th century next to Abraham Lincoln." The work had been acquired by the owner's 3 times great-grandfather, and for a long time, the family thought it was by a completely different artist. The appraiser gave it an auction value of $300,000 to $500,000, which was updated in 2020 to $600,000 to $800,000. He said the painting was so good, quote, "it could hang in a museum." The owner took him at his word, and soon the painting was on a long-term loan to the Amon Carter Museum of American Art in Fort Worth, after the museum's curator Rebecca Lawton saw the painting on Antiques Roadshow. She said, "It's a terrific genre subject that combines fact with fiction. The setting is accurate, as Clay, a veteran campaigner, certainly would have stopped at country taverns to solicit votes during the 1844 presidential election. This is a perfect picture of life in antebellum America and a wonderful rediscovery." The owner of an 1896 Frederic Remington portrait of his great-grandfather didn't immediately hit it off with the appraiser at the Birmingham, Alabama taping of Antiques Roadshow, which aired on June 21, 2014. As the appraiser explained once the cameras were rolling,
"I've never reprimanded a guest for manhandling a painting before."
"I'm glad you're taking care of my painting."
"I'm trying to."
Fortunately, others in the owner's family were not so sloppy. As the appraiser noted, "Your family's taken very good care of it for a long time. It also comes with this letter from Remington to your great-grandfather. They talk about their adventures that they had. Really, really wonderful." The appraiser gave the picture/letter combo a shocking auction value of $600,000 to $800,000. And a big twist happened after the episode aired. Laura Foster, the director of the Remington Art Museum, discovered that the owner's family had gotten the painting from the museum in a trade, trading 2 other Remingtons for the portrait of their ancestor. One problem: the 2 paintings they traded to the museum both turned out to be fakes. Still, it was unintentional, as the family thought they were real. Foster said, "I just want to say that everybody meant well. In 1938, the world was full of fake Remingtons. Remington has always been a great target for fakes and forgeries." If you tuned in to the July 10, 2010 episode of Antiques Roadshow, you might have wondered why a woman brought in a bent wire close hanger that she'd hung some guitar picks off of. Well, Philistine, you should know that is art. Very expensive and famous art, it turns out. The owner explained that her family had acquired the piece from the artist Alexander Calder himself after her aunt essentially traded a pillow for it. She had done a needlepoint pillow of one of Calder's works, and he was astounded. He'd never seen one like that before, and so she gave it to him, and a couple of days later, somebody appeared at the doorway, and he had given her this mobile as a thank you for the pillow. The appraiser gave the mobile a wide estimate of $400,000 to $1 million, with the low end being an auction value and the million mark being a retail price. The Raleigh, North Carolina episode that aired on June 27, 2009 is a legendary one in Antiques Roadshow history. A woman brought in a collection of decorative jade objects from the 1700s, which her father had purchased when he was stationed in China in the 1930s and 40s. Once all the pieces were added up, the estimate shocked her.
For a total amount of between $710,000 to $1,070,000.
Damn.
Major news outlets like Reuters covered the record-breaking valuation, with executive producer Marcia Bemko telling them, "For 13 years, we've been hoping to feature a $1 million appraisal on Antiques Roadshow. It's been our great white whale. We're thrilled that, despite this year's slow economy, Roadshow finally captured this elusive trophy." Alas, things didn't quite pan out at auction due in part to the vagaries of the Chinese art market. The pieces that were on Antiques Roadshow reportedly sold for $494,615, while 30 additional pieces the owner had but hadn't brought on the show sold for $350,523. So even combined, they barely hit the estimate. It's always nice to see something a bit different on Antiques Roadshow, especially when there's a documented history and provenance behind it. So it was, with an amazing collection of what were basically the earliest type of baseball cards that appeared on the January 5, 2015 episode. The owner explained how they came into her family a very long time ago. Back in 1871, my great-great-grandmother had a boarding house in Boston, and she housed the Boston baseball team. Most of them had come from Cincinnati Red Stockings and were among the first to be paid to play baseball. The team had even written a letter to her great-great-grandmother, which the appraiser especially loved as it added some very personalized provenance. It all added up to a treasure to remember.
I would insure it for at least $1 million. It is the greatest archive I have ever had at the Roadshow.
The collection of 5 cups an owner brought on the Tulsa, Oklahoma episode of Antiques Roadshow that aired on July 23, 2011 were always going to be controversial. That's because they were all made out of rhino horn. You might know rhinos as super endangered, and that making things out of their horns is now illegal. Given that these cups were carved around the year 1700, most places allow them to be bought and sold, with certain restrictions. So the appraiser went for it.
A conservative number would be between $1 million and $1,500,000 for this group.
Serious?
Before the cups went to auction, though, China banned the import of items made from rhino horns. That caused the market to crash, and as a result, only 2 of the 5 sold, fetching a combined total of $329,000. The painting of a stern-looking man in a Mexican-style hat and poncho that was on the Corpus Christi, Texas episode that aired on August 4, 2012 might not have seemed like much at first, at least not to the family. The owner said that though the family kept the painting for decades, they also kind of kept it hidden.
The painting for some time was in bad condition, and it was hanging behind a door. If that door was open, then you couldn't see the painting.
That hiding place proved to be exceptionally good because the painting turned out to be a masterpiece by artist Diego Rivera that art historians spent more than 50 years looking for. As the appraiser explained, there are 2 extraordinarily intriguing words in an artist's catalog of paintings, and those are whereabouts unknown. The research that we found in the authentication process of it is that it had been missing. In the records in Mexico City, it was unknown. Where's the painting? Then she delivered the verdict.
I would be putting a retail estimate on the piece of between $800,000 and $1 million.
That has since been updated to $1.2 to $2.2 million. Obviously, realizing the cultural importance of the painting, the owner arranged for it to be on permanent loan to the San Antonio Museum of Art. The famous Navajo blanket episode of Antiques Roadshow was filmed in Tucson, Arizona, and aired on June 9, 2001. The owner of the beautiful blanket told the appraiser, "I don't know an awful lot about it, except that it was given by Kit Carson, who I'm sure everybody knows, and his history, given to the foster father of my grandmother." The appraiser was interested in the Kit Carson connection, but since the owner had no proof of it, at least at that time, it couldn't really be included in the theoretical value. It didn't much matter. The owner got his first inkling the blanket was special when the appraiser called it a, quote, national treasure and said,
"When you walked in with this, I just about died."
After asking whether the owner was a wealthy man, the appraiser said,
On a really bad day, this textile would be worth $350,000. On a good day, it's about $500,000.
Updates over the past 2 decades have increased that number to $1.5 million to $2 million. The name Patek Philippe automatically means lots of dollar signs. So the watch an owner brought to the St. Paul, Minnesota episode that aired on June 26, 2004 was always going to have an impressive value. But even then, this one surpassed all expectations. The owner explained how it came to be in his family. This watch was handed down from my great-grandfather. He was the owner of the St. Paul Pioneer Press and Dispatch back in 1914 when he received this watch, and it was handed down from him to my father, and then he gave it to me. While Artful Living reports the owner was hoping it was worth maybe $50,000, the appraiser had a heck of a surprise for him.
This watch at auction, I suspect, would bring close to $250,000. No.
But this valuation would actually end up being far too low, as the watch was later discovered to be one of a kind. The owner decided to sell the watch, and in 2006, it sold at a Sotheby's auction for $1,531,760.
And that watch today, we estimate, is worth at least $2 and possibly $3 million.
In June of 2001, a soft-spoken old guy named Ted Kuntz hit the old guy lottery when he brought his grandmother's blanket to an Antiques Roadshow taping and discovered that it had more than just sentimental value. According to Kuntz, his grandmother had received it from a frontiersman that she grew up with, who had in turn received it as a gift from the characteristically problematic Old West legend Kit Carson. Kuntz had no way of knowing that the textile he was bringing to the Tucson, Arizona showroom was actually a Navajo First Phase Ute Chief's blanket, dating back to the 1800s and estimated at the time to be worth between $350,000 and $500,000. PBS viewers across the country cried into their tote bags as a gentleman's life was forever changed.
On a really bad day, this textile would be worth $350,000. On a good day, it's about $500,000.
Oh my God.
But what happened next? And why was it so valuable to begin with? According to Arizona Public Media, Kuntz decided pretty quickly that he couldn't preserve the blanket properly, given the realization of just how much it was worth. He wound up selling the piece to an anonymous buyer who had it placed in the Detroit Institute of Arts. Kuntz, meanwhile, used the money from the sale to pay off the home where he and his wife, Virginia, lived. Otherwise, though, it didn't seem to really affect his life that much, as Kuntz revealed that he decided to keep working and didn't retire until he was 74. The blanket was so valuable in the first place because of its rarity and historical importance. According to PBS, Navajo wool blankets were the result of a particular period of the tribe's existence. The act of herding sheep for wool only made it to the Navajo in the mid-17th century via Spanish settlers and explorers, and they picked up weaving from the Pueblo around the turn of the 18th century. A few decades of refinement later, and Navajo blankets had become the gold standard in their field. By the 1860s, they sold for between $100 and $150, or around half the price of a house. Adding to its rarity, the Antiques Roadshow piece was what was called a first phase blanket. Navajo blankets are grouped into 3 phases of production, with the first phase spanning between the 1820s and around 1865. First phase blankets, as displayed on the show, are recognizable by their blue, brown, and white striped patterns, and only around 50 of them exist today. The Kuntz family's windfall on Antiques Roadshow also led to another person getting rich. According to NBC News, Lauren Kritzer was struggling to make ends meet after losing a leg in a car accident. That's when he happened to see Kuntz and his blanket on Antiques Roadshow and realized that he had one of those blankets too. Kritzer ended up bringing the blanket to John Moran Auctioneers, who in 2017 sold the blanket for $1.5 million. Unfortunately, his efforts to turn his life around have hit some speed bumps since then, following an arrest in 2018 for firearms possession. He was booked again in 2020 on a number of charges. And as for the original Kuntz blanket, well, as valuable as that blanket was, that value has been eclipsed a few times in the years since by other finds on the Antiques Roadshow. It was blown away, for instance, by a $1 million 19th century baseball card collection featuring players from the Boston Red Stockings.
If you're going to insure it,
Insurance, okay.
I would insure it for at least $1 million.
Are you serious?
And even that has been topped by a custom-made Swiss Patek Philippe pocket watch, which was originally estimated at around $250,000 back in 2004, but which has skyrocketed in value to somewhere between $2 and $3 million today. So check your attic, because who knows what treasures you might find.
While Antiques Roadshow has showcased several famous pieces of art, few have had a history like that of a particular soldier's portrait by the artist Frederic Remington. In January 1896, U.S. Army Captain Lee Febiger invited Frederic Remington to go duck and quail hunting across the border in Mexico. According to Express and News, while the hunting was mostly a bust, the painter did produce an outstanding portrait of the captain during that trip. Nearly 120 years later, Febiger's great-grandson, Charles Dodge, participated in a 2014 taping for the PBS series Antiques Roadshow in Birmingham, Alabama. Dodge brought along Remington's painting, as well as a personal letter from the artist to February. Dodge told AL.com when the appraiser at the roadshow said the painting and the letter together would be worth about $600,000 to $800,000. Frankly, I was pretty shocked. But there's much more to this painting's story than just its price tag. Frederic Remington was born in Canton, New York in 1861 and grew up in nearby Ogdensburg. To appease his Army colonel father, he attended military school, but Remington preferred drawing soldiers to being one and eventually became a successful artist. Boston-based art appraiser Colleen Fesco said, "Frederic Remington is one of the most important Western artists of the turn of the century. He didn't have a tremendous amount of training, but a natural instinct for the vitality and the style of the West." When Remington painted Lee February as the ideal infantryman in 1896, it was part of a series of works depicting the various branches of the U.S. Army. And while the Frederic Remington Art Museum in Ogdensburg eventually ended up with the painting, February's family made a deal with the museum in 1938 to take ownership of the portrait. According to AL.com, the museum wanted a pair of Remington illustrations, which were being offered for a combined $1,000 by a reputable Boston art dealer. February's daughter, Frances, Charles Dodge's grandmother, purchased one of these illustrations for $500. The museum bought the second illustration and then traded the February portrait to Frances for her half of the Remington set. Since the museum had valued the February painting at $100, the equivalent of a little more than $2,000 today, it was considered a bargain.
A good deal. A good deal.
However, when the two illustrations were discovered to be fakes in the early 1970s and were placed in the museum's basement, the history of the sale seemed to go with them. But after the February painting appeared on Antiques Roadshow at the end of March 2015, Laura Foster, the director of the Frederic Remington Art Museum at the time, uncovered original museum documents from 1938 discussing the trade and managed to connect the dots. Foster later told AL.com, "Remington has always been a great target for fakes and forgeries. We don't know if anybody in this chain, except the maker, ever knew that these were not legitimate Remingtons." But the authenticity of the February portrait has never been in doubt, with Dodge claiming that sometime in the 1960s, the painting's reappraised value had gone up to $7,500. And as Remington's reputation and the value of his art continued to grow, the portrait's worth ballooned by hundreds of thousands of dollars by 2015. Colleen Fesco explained during the Antiques Roadshow episode, "He really is an iconic figure in American painting, and this piece is really a wonderful example of Remington's work at the turn of the century." Dodge, who inherited the painting in the 1960s, believes the portrait of his great-grandfather ended up in the right place, telling AL.com, "The painting is in the place that it ought to be, though I am sad for the Remington Museum that they ended up with a forgery in process." Dodge ended up loaning the February portrait to the Birmingham Museum of Art, where it can be seen amid a growing collection of Remington's other work. Dodge explained his choice of venues with AL.com, saying, "I think they've got one of the largest collections of Remington bronzes, but no paintings, so this will be the only painting. I just thought that would be a great place to let others see it as well."
Antiques Roadshow is the popular PBS program that reveals the secret history and value of rare and interesting objects. But what is it really like to be on the show? How do the appraisers know so much? Keep watching to learn the untold truth of Antiques Roadshow. Antiques Roadshow's website explains that the vast majority of antiques on the show are usually valued at under $500. Still, there are those moments when something is actually worth quite a bit more. One man in Tulsa, Oklahoma brought a collection of cups made from rhinoceros' horns to the show in 2011. It turned out that the 5 cups had been carved in the 1700s and were once used as drinking cups. The collection was valued at between $1 million and $1.5 million and remains one of the most valuable items ever seen on the show. Then there was a man who, in 2004, brought a family heirloom to the show. It was described as a Swiss Patek Philippe pocket watch. All the owner knew was that it belonged to his grandfather back in 1914 and had been passed down through the family. The watch came complete with the original box, warranty, and even spare parts, and was obviously well taken care of. The owner had also had it appraised and knew it was worth at least $6,000. Imagine his surprise when Antiques Roadshow valued the watch at $250,000. But it gets even better. 2 years later, the pocket watch sold at Sotheby's for $1,541,212. Today, that same watch is worth between $2 million and $3 million. Some strange stuff does occasionally appear on Antiques Roadshow. In March 2020, what looked like a large varnished nut appeared on the show. The object brought a lot of comments and laughs, mostly because it sort of resembled a big derriere. The nut was ultimately identified as a coco de mer from the Seychelles Islands, which are located far off the east coast of Africa and the western Indian Ocean. The nuts were originally believed to be from mythical trees below the ocean until their origins were finally identified in 1768. According to antique expert Mark Allam, it's hand-finished as well. It's essentially a huge seed pod, a sort of double coconut. Another oddball piece was a simple Monopoly game. What made it unique was that after a group of thieves committed England's Great Train Robbery in 1963, the gang played the game using real cash at a hideout. Authorities on the gang's trail found the game and were able to identify the robbers from their fingerprints on the board. Several men were convicted of the robbery, but the true mastermind of the operation was not revealed until 2014. Appraiser George Archdale said this about the board's value.
It's possible to say perhaps it's £100 to £200 of someone's money, but would it be right for people to profit from crime?
Antiques Roadshow's so-called experts messed up following the very first season of the show in 1996. Appraiser Russ Pritchard valued an antique sword at $35,000. The Boston Herald called foul, and producers discovered that Pritchard and alleged sword owner Stephen Sadler were high school buddies and staged the appraisal. Sadler didn't even own the sword. The episode was pulled, but Pritchard and another cohort, George Juno, were contacted by descendants of Major Samuel J. Wilson who had seen the show. The men appraised Wilson's Civil War sword at nearly $8,000 and bought it for display in the National Civil War Museum in Pennsylvania. Instead, however, the men coordinated the sale of the sword for $20,000. Pritchard eventually went to jail. These days, Antiques Roadshow makes sure to keep an updated list of appraisers on their website, but there's always a chance that even a professional might make a mistake. Some years back, appraiser Stephen Fletcher identified an odd-looking jug as late 19th century. He compared it to Pablo Picasso and valued the item between $30,000 and $50,000. However, a fan of the show recognized the work and confirmed that the jug was made in high school circa 1973. Antique Roadshow's bona fide experts are usually good at spotting fakes, but a few get by them, such as a hand-painted box by early Pennsylvania folk artist Jacob Weber. In 2016, the show's website confirmed that appraiser Wes Cowan incorrectly assessed the item as an authentic antique. Antique dealer Patrick Bell set the record straight, explaining that the box's hasp, hinges, wood bottom, and paint indicated the trinket was probably a fake. Antiques Roadshow corrected the error, reporting the outcome and admitting that even so-called experts can be fooled. Still, the antique box received an appraised value of between $100 and $150, not bad for some early American folk art. Fraudulent watches are especially prone to duping innocent buyers. On an episode of Antiques Roadshow's British version, watch expert Richard Price made it clear that fake watches have increasingly become harder to spot, and that sophisticated fakes can test even experts. The trick is to check out the movements, or such telltale signs like peeling gold plating, fake hallmarks which mark the purity of the item, and even the watch's weight can signify it isn't real. This is best checked by a specialist or professional jeweler. Jewelry is another problem area, according to appraiser Joyce Jones. The market is ripe for rip-off replicas of such well-known brands as Coco Chanel, Christian Dior, and Elsa Schiaparelli especially. Some items are forbidden to bring to Antiques Roadshow. Ivory is one of them. It's not that it's necessarily illegal to own antique ivory in its various forms, but rather that our government almost completely banned commercial trade in 2016 because the ivory trade continues to encourage poaching. The 2016 directive was actually a follow-up to the Endangered Species Act of 1973, which required permission from the Secretary of the Interior or the Secretary of Commerce. And although ivory is commonly seen at many estates and yard sales, Antiques Roadshow would rather not deal with its sensitive nature. Another touchy area is Native American artifacts. Antiques Roadshow explains that laws governing ownership of such things make it a complicated field. In 2013, a woman brought an Anasazi pot to the show, which was valued between $3,000 and $4,000. But the item raised a question as to whether it was legal for the lady to own it. In 1990, according to the National Park Service, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act made it illegal to collect native artifacts. But that has not stopped people from doing it anyway. Every person lucky enough to get into an Antiques Roadshow event is guaranteed a free appraisal, but there is no guarantee you will actually appear on the show. The reason is that at an average of 2,500 attendees with 2 items per show, upwards of 5,000 objects could possibly be appraised. The key to actually scoring an on-camera appraisal is to bring something truly unique with a great story behind it. Even something with a high appraisal might be passed up for something else with an intriguing history and provenance. Here's how it works. Appraisers view each item at the event and alert producers if it's something show-worthy. From there, the owner of the interesting find waits in line. Eventually, they will be sorted into other lines, depending on what category their particular item falls into. After more waiting, the staff will shuffle them onto the set and into another line to meet with an appraiser. If the appraiser thinks the item is special enough, they tell another producer, who then decides whether to air the appraisal.
Shove something in a box that turns out to be a pretty valuable item. So who knows? Who knows?
Bear in mind, if an owner of an interesting object gets this far and the item is a hit, they will be sure to act very, very surprised.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
No appraisal is official, since those in the business actually use 3 methods to assess the value of an item: auction, retail, and insurance. The auction value is basically set by the buyer, although someone buying for a highly desirable item might bid far more than the item's retail value. Appraiser and auctioneer Carrie Schreiber says, "This is why the most valuable items are often sold at auction. It's often the best way to realize maximum value for a rare object." On the retail side of things, dealers pay less than an item's worth in order to make money when they sell it, and that can result in setting the price higher for a bigger profit. That leads to the insured value, which insurance companies set at the top end of retail value, just enough for the owner to buy a replacement.
The partial team signed 1930 Braves ball. I'd put the value on that one for insurance purposes at about $1,000.
Indeed, any appraisal on Antiques Roadshow is basically approximate, although the appraisers do have time to research the item at hand using computers, libraries, sales comparisons, and what is known about the item's history. If the item is a really big deal, the producers and appraisers likely know about it before it's even brought to the show. And since appraisers are not paid, giving accurate values can give them needed exposure to draw more business. If an item turns out to be extremely valuable, Antiques Roadshow does keep security guards around, and police are on hand to escort those with high-dollar items to their car. The official rules assure attendees that Antiques Roadshow hires private security and the police to monitor events. Additionally, all guests who enter an event are subject to searches, and the show's producers can deny entry to anyone for any reason. But securing the area goes much further than just hiring guards and notifying police. In her 2009 book, Antiques Roadshow Behind the Scenes, an insider's guide to PBS's #1 weekly show, author Marcia Bemko wrote about security director Sean Quinn. The security director personally visited each town ahead of the show to make recommendations and develop a security plan. Volunteers working for the show are trained and cautioned to call a supervisor in security should they see something amiss. Attendees are limited to 2 items per ticket, but an item can be a collection. Even so, the items should be as closely related as possible. There are, however, certain items that the show will not appraise. These include ammunition or explosives, bicycles, cars, coins, fossils, paper currency, stamps, or stock certificates. In the interest of safety, antique glass fire extinguishers are prohibited too. These round glass collectibles were filled with either salt water or a chemical, carbon tetrachloride, the latter of which can be dangerous if the fragile bulb is broken. Notably, weapons are also prohibited under certain circumstances. All knives and swords must be in a sheath or wrapped to prevent injury. All firearms have to be unloaded, and even if it is an antique, bringing a gun is still subject to local, state, and federal laws. It is also important to remember that anyone entering the area can be searched if they appear suspicious. It isn't easy to get on Antiques Roadshow, although there are 4 ways to score tickets. One of them is a sweepstakes, wherein entrants access the show's website with a valid email address and fill out an electronic form in its entirety. The second sweepstakes requires participants to follow Antiques Roadshow on Twitter or Instagram with their own account and type in a comment which tags a friend or includes the name of the city where the appraisal event is taking place. Then there's the Knock Our Socks Off contest. In this, entrants have to submit an online entry form at a different site. The submission must include a description of the potential item in 20 words or less and a story about the item in 200 words or less. Owners also have to submit at least 1 photo of the item, and it has to comply with specific upload criteria. And the item must fit into a category on a drop-down list. Last is the furniture contest, wherein those wanting to lug their antique rocker or other large piece of furniture must enter the first sweepstakes contest, live within 60 miles of the event, submit an entry form, include a photo, and agree to let the show staff transport the item to and from the event and use it on the show. Artificial autographs, imposter urns, and bootleg bowls are just some of the skilled fakeries and forgeries that unsuspecting guests have brought to Antiques Roadshow over the years. A guest on a 2005 episode of Antiques Roadshow on PBS was hoping that the large stone sculpture his parents kept as a poolside decoration was a piece of ancient Mesoamerican art. The guest claimed that testing showed that it hadn't been made with the help of modern tools, but appraiser John Buxton only had to take 1 look at the piece to shoot down any hopes that it was an ancient and highly valuable example of Olmec art. Olmec art, produced in the Gulf Coast region of Mexico between 1200 BC and 400 BC, is highly regarded for its fine detail and use of jade, volcanic basalt, and skillfully crafted ceramics. The most famous earliest examples of Olmec art are astoundingly large carved heads, many of which were crafted in San Lorenzo, in what is now the state of Veracruz. Unfortunately, when it came to style, this carving was little more than a dud.
And stylistically, this is not even close to what Olmec should be.
Buxton went on to say that the piece lacked the balance that an Olmec figure should have. While he appraised the piece for up to $2,500 as decorative art, he delivered one more blow. He told the owner that if it had really been Olmec, it would have been worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. At first, things must have looked just fine during an episode of Antiques Roadshow filmed in Charleston, South Carolina in 2015. Appraiser Wes Cowan told a guest that he had a small art piece that had been painted by folk artist Jacob Weber. For a random discovery in an antique shop, the little wooden box was potentially an incredible find, especially considering the man's grandfather had paid $1,000 for the piece. Cowan appraised it for $10,000 to $15,000. But things took a turn for this particular box after the episode aired in early 2016. Another antiques dealer saw the piece and contacted Cowan, telling him that the hinges were wrong, and other boxes by Weber had projecting bases, not ones that were even with the sides. PBS published a correction, including the box's new value, a mere $100 to $150. To be fair, this outlandish grotesque jug represents a case of mistaken identity more than outright fakery, but it remains one of the most interesting missteps made by an Antiques Roadshow appraiser. Seen in a January 2016 episode, the ceramic vessel sports a variety of twisted faces, a stitched-up shut eye, and other distorted features. Appraiser Stephen L. Fletcher said that he believed it was from the late 19th to early 20th century, and part of a grotesque-faced jug tradition from around the mid-Atlantic states. Fletcher appraised the jug at an incredible value.
Somebody might well ask in the area between $30,000 and $50,000 for this.
But soon after the episode aired, a viewer sent in a tip that the jug was actually made by her friend Betsy Sewell, who confirmed that she had made it while in high school in the 1970s. The vessel's newly appraised value plummeted to $3,000 to $5,000. At least Fletcher remained highly complimentary towards Sewell's work. Surprisingly enough, Alvin Barr, the guest who brought the jug to the show, was also relieved when its value dropped, telling the Bulletin, "I hated it when it was $30,000 to $50,000, because who wants $30,000 to $50,000 lying around their house?" Block front cabinets are linked to Boston furniture craftsmen beginning in the mid-1700s, who created the curving forms of the furniture as a way to appeal to the tastes of upper-class clientele. The style not only required solid pieces of wood, but also extra time and a high level of skill. A guest who appeared on Antiques Roadshow in 2013 believed they had just such a piece of finely crafted furniture, but appraiser Leslie Kino had to break the difficult truth. The chest was a fake. While the initial shape and fixture seemed right, Kino pointed out a series of increasingly suspicious flaws. The dovetail joints and other segments of the interior were stained to mimic the oxidation that would be seen on genuinely old wood. The same effect was spotted along the bottom of the cabinet, and whoever had made the fake had used poplar as a secondary wood. Real Boston furniture makers would have used white pine instead. Kino said that a real block front chest would have brought in up to $75,000 for an especially nice one. The fake? Just $3,000 to $5,000. At least it was enough for the guest to break even. John Buxton seems to have encountered quite a few fakes in his time on Antiques Roadshow. On a 2016 episode, he spoke with a guest who hoped that the small vessel he brought in was from the pre-Columbian history of the Tairona people. The guest even brought along documents purporting to authenticate the ceramic bowl, which included 4 finely made animal figures on the rim and a human figure in the vessel itself. While Buxton was complimentary toward the artistry of the bowl, he wasn't so keen on its historic pedigree. The figures were a bit odd for the established artistic tradition of the Tairona, for one.
The other thing,
Yeah.
you hear I tap that?
Right.
When you hear that, it's a very high ring.
Buxton noted that the high pitch of the noise would be difficult to achieve if the piece had been fired authentically in a low-temperature, old-school pit kiln. The condition of the clay instead hinted that it had been fired in a modern, much hotter electric kiln, with an appraised value of just $300 at the most. The poor guest was out a hefty chunk of money from his original $1,800 purchase. The May 2021 episode of the BBC's Antiques Roadshow at Stoner Park included an intriguing silver box. Though it was small and relatively plain, it contained an inscription that read, "The gift of Stella to Dean Swift." As appraiser Mark Allam clarified, the Swift in question was 18th century writer Jonathan Swift, author of the 1726 story Gulliver's Travels. Swift was close friends with Esther Johnson, the daughter of a housekeeper who later came to be called Stella, and who was purported to be Swift's muse, and perhaps even his secret wife. That makes for an interesting backstory that could boost the value of the box, if only it were genuine. As Alan pointed out, the box was made out of a material known as Sheffield plate, which first hit the scene in 1743. Stella had died in 1728, making the inscription impossible. A closer inspection revealed that the inscription was stamped, not engraved. The guest took the news that it was only worth about 40 pounds at most pretty well, saying she was glad for the opportunity anyhow. The guest who brought what appeared to be a buffalo robe to Antiques Roadshow said she had purchased it from a handyman who had helped redecorate her mountain home. The robe had allegedly been sitting in storage for 3 decades and cost the guest $300. Appraiser John Buxton said that the art form of the painted buffalo skin was an important part to Plains Indian culture, who used preserved buffalo skins as canvases to make decorative pieces and also create records of important events. However, Buxton started to note several issues with the piece in front of him. It had what first looked to be an authentic design, including a series of holes on the edge that would have been made by stakes people set to stretch the skin during the tanning process. However, the repairs he spotted on the robe were stitched with cotton thread, not authentic sinew sourced from the buffalo. The hide also appeared to have been tanned using more modern techniques instead of traditional brain tanning. As a decorative piece, it was appraised at $1,000 to $2,000, so at least the guest was able to easily make back her initial investment. On the BBC version of Antiques Roadshow, appraiser Ronnie Archer Morgan was intrigued by what first appeared to be a guardian figure made by a Kodak craftsperson.
They influence the greatest modern artists of all time. They are very, very sought after.
The figures were originally crafted to embody the power and spirits of the ancestors, and were originally found in association with family remains stored in baskets or bark containers beneath the figure. Then Archer Morgan breaks the bad news. While the art piece was very nice, it wasn't quite the correct size, and it was likely made in 1980, a far cry from authentic pieces from the 19th and early 20th centuries. However, it wasn't all doom and gloom. Archer Morgan gave the figure a value of 150 pounds, which represented a pretty good deal considering the guest originally paid just 1.5 pounds for the figure, and given the fraught history of artwork and objects that have been taken from African people without permission, it may be just as well that this wasn't genuine after all. The vase that appeared on a 2011 episode of Antiques Roadshow may not have seemed like much, but the clean lines and dark green glaze of the piece indicated that it might have been a valuable Tico vase. The Tico Pottery Company produced decorative pieces between 1902 and 1929, and became known for matte glazes and green hues, sometimes applied to pieces that towered more than 7 feet. But was this much smaller vase the real deal?
So, give me the news.
All right. It's not good.
According to appraiser Suzanne Perro, it wasn't. The glaze wasn't the right shade of Tico green, and she also noted that it was a bit too heavy and sported red clay and ridges that weren't characteristic of genuine Tico pieces. She noted that real Tico vessels were typically cast and not thrown on a pottery wheel, a more hands-on technique that may explain the unusual ridges. Perro estimated it was made recently and was worth about $200. The buyer had paid over $1,400. Beatlemania is a regular presence on Antiques Roadshow, so it was no surprise when two sisters appeared with their collection of Beatles photos and papers on a 2021 episode of the British Antiques Roadshow. But unfortunately, one signed picture of the Fab Four proved troublesome. Expert John Foster noted that an odd stiffness to the signatures didn't make sense. The young superstars had signed their names countless times at that point in their careers. The signatures were more likely made by one of the band's employees, who were known to sign memorabilia in an attempt to ease the overwhelming demand set by fans. Compared to more fluid signatures that were confirmed to come from the band members, the difference between those and the fake was all the more obvious. Thankfully, the fake signatures weren't the only thing they brought. Their father, a stuntman, had left them an impressive collection of Beatles ephemera that still held some welcome surprises. The back of a call sheet from the 1965 film Help contained what appeared to be genuine signatures of all 4 band members. With this discovery, Foster appraised the whole collection at a very respectable £5,000. If appraiser Andy McConnell had been holding a real Islamic glass cup, it would have been one of the most exciting finds in the history of Antiques Roadshow. Islamic glassmakers rightfully earned high praise for their work, creating finely wrought, colorful glass pieces beginning around the 7th century in Egypt and nearby parts of Asia. With its carved text and figures, the vessel certainly looked worn enough to have been around for 1,000 years. Unfortunately, McConnell said that the engraved marks were made with acid, a much more modern glassmaking technique. If the shape of a fish and Arabic text had really been ground into the glass centuries ago, artisans would have left behind tool marks. McConnell generously gave the piece a value of 800 quid, which was the price the guest actually paid for it, perhaps mitigating some of his obvious disappointment at having to tell the guest in front of a crowd that it was far from genuine. He also left the door open for mistakes, saying the man should consult with experts at the British Museum just in case.
And if I'm wrong, come back and kick me. Please.
You don't have to be a professional antiques appraiser to know that Tiffany glass is big business. American designer Louis Comfort Tiffany built his artistic reputation on intricate glassworks, establishing a studio full of fellow creatives that made Tiffany a legendary name in the world of design. So when a guest brought a signature opalescent glass vase and paperweight to Antiques Roadshow in Richmond, Virginia, it wasn't unreasonable to think that she had something truly special. But appraiser Barbara Diesroth quickly moved to deflate any unrealistic hopes.
They're trying to be glass by Louis Comfort Tiffany, made at the turn of the century. In fact, they're not.
Though the pieces were signed, the signatures appeared to be fake and were deemed too clunky by Diesroth to be genuine. The paperweight, which Tiffany never made in the style seen on the show, was worth $30. The vase was about $200 in value. By the 19th century, the French Sèvres porcelain factory had established itself as a major manufacturer of trendy porcelain pieces that landed in well-heeled homes across the continent, and they remain a popular porcelain manufacturer to this day. Collectors are especially interested in antique examples from this company, like its elaborate service sets. So it's no surprise that so many factories applied fake Sèvres marks to inferior pieces. The guest on a Season 7 episode of Antiques Roadshow filmed in Kansas City presented just such a box, as well as an urn that was purportedly made at the Ludwigsburg Porcelain Factory, another producer of fine pottery based in Germany during the 1700s. But when appraiser David Lackey took a look at both pieces, he found some serious issues. Though both pieces were pictured and described in an auction catalog and were very finely painted, they weren't genuine according to Lackey. The manufacturer's marks were the main tell, as they just weren't right. Even with the fake marks, the guest was told he could get anywhere from $2,500 to $3,750 for the set. The guest who presented a presumed Chokwe dance mask on a 2018 episode came into possession of the piece after a series of trades back and forth amongst aficionados of African art.
A friend of mine from Fairview Heights bought it. He paid like $3,900 for it.
The Chokwe people are well known for their mastery of many different art forms, including wood mask carvings. Traditionally, masks used in rituals and dances are made with distinct forms that often include markings engraved on the mask's cheeks and forehead, and fiber elements such as raffia. But back on Antiques Roadshow, appraiser John Buxton found some serious issues. When Buxton turned the mask around, he found that the holes where the raffia might have been affixed were oddly free of wear, which was unusual for a mask that should have been used during an energetic dance. The interior of the mask also didn't have the marks one would expect from something that came into contact with a sweaty human face. Buxton ultimately concluded that it was an intentional fake, making it worth just $200 to $300.
So this is really made to fool you.
Compared to the six figures that a real Chokwe mask could get on the art market, it was likely a genuine disappointment to the guest. Pottery from ancient China can easily become the centerpiece of someone's collection, but the vases presented on a 2001 episode of Antiques Roadshow filmed in Miami weren't what they appeared to be. Appraiser James Callahan said that at least one of the vases had the look of a Tang Dynasty vessel. Spanning 618 to 907 AD, the Tang Dynasty saw ceramic artists innovate the use of glazes, bringing new colors to China's pottery. Over on Antiques Roadshow, however, the vessels were pretty suspect. The buyer revealed that she bought them at a market in China.
He did tell us that they had just recently been excavated.
Well, in actuality, they weren't. They were brand new.
Callahan took a small tool and gently scraped the top of one piece, leaving behind a mark. If the vase in question were made of hard jade, that scratch would never have been made, meaning the vessel was likely made out of a softer soapstone or similar rock. The piece also included components made from aluminum, a material that wasn't put into common usage until well into the 19th century. The other smaller vase was at least made out of ceramic, though the Tong-style metal piece that had been applied to it was not gold, but a cheaper anodized metal. Though she didn't specify how much she and her husband had paid for the pieces, hopefully it wasn't much, Callahan gave them a value of just $10 to $20 each. A painting lost, found, then lost and found again, only to be called a fake and tossed behind a door? What's the history of the multi-million-dollar painting that one lucky Antiques Roadshow attendee found? You never really know what you're going to get when you bring in your family heirloom or thrift store find to Antiques Roadshow. It's not a secret that most people make the trip to the show because they secretly think they have something so valuable it'll change their life. That's not often the case, but once in a while, dreams come true. In 2012, Antiques Roadshow visited Corpus Christi, Texas, where a man brought an oil painting that had been in his family for more than 80 years. His great-grandparents had bought the painting around 1930, most likely in Mexico. It was a depiction of a serious man looking straight at the viewer, wearing a poncho and sombrero-style hat, holding a long tool of some sort, and standing by a small bucket or pail. The painting's owner told the appraiser Colleen Fesco that the painting had been hanging behind a door in his house.
The behind a door?
Behind a door in the house.
Dear.
If that door was open, then you couldn't see the painting.
The painting turned out to be El Albañil, or the Bricklayer, an early work of renowned Latin American artist Diego Rivera, who had been just 18 when he painted the piece. Fesco said that there were only 3 or 4 of Rivera's paintings from that early time period, and that one of the things that made the piece so interesting is that it foreshadowed his future technique and what would become the subject of so many of his portraits and murals, the workers of Mexico. Most interestingly, Fesco said that El Albañil was listed in the Mexican city records as missing after 1930, presumably when the man's great-grandparents purchased it. In 1996, El Albañil would briefly resurface to the public when it was authenticated and exhibited. The San Antonio Museum of Art said that someone brought the painting to Marion Ettinger, the museum's curator, who told Ettinger that his family had acquired it in the 1940s, and at the time an expert had told them it was a fake due to Rivera's signature. But as Fesco noted, it was different because Rivera had been so young and hadn't yet formalized his signature. Also, when the expert had seen the painting, it was badly damaged with a big gash in the canvas. By coincidence, Ettinger had apparently received a book about Diego Rivera's early works around the same time she was introduced to El Albañil. Ettinger immediately recognized on another painting in that book the unusual signature he'd seen. Then, in 1997, an expert on Rivera's paintings was able to authenticate El Albañil and ensure it got a proper restoration, before it went on to a starring role in 1998 at the Nelson A. Rockefeller Center for Latin American Art at the San Antonio Museum. That seems to be the last that the whereabouts of El Albañil were known, as after that it somehow ended up behind a door. In 2012, the painting resurfaced on Antiques Roadshow, where Fesco confirmed that the restoration had been excellent. Because it was by a major artist, was an important piece of history, and it was also pretty nice. She called it a trifecta.
Trifectas usually pay pretty well. I would be putting a retail estimate on the piece of between $800,000 and $1 million.
Seriously?
It was the most expensive appraisal of a painting ever on Antiques Roadshow, and in 2018, an updated appraisal put the retail value even higher at up to $2.2 million.
Unbelievable. I did not expect that. I'm astounded. I really don't know what to say.
In a follow-up interview on Twin Cities PBS, the owner was asked what he was planning to do with the painting now that he knew its history, significance, and value.
Now I'm really scared to carry it around at this point, you know.
He also stated that because of the painting's importance, he thought that it should go to a museum for everyone to see. And so it went on permanent loan back to the San Antonio Museum of Art.
William Shakespeare was unquestionably one of the greatest writers of all time, so maybe it's no surprise that one of his tragedies sold for a staggering price on Antiques Roadshow. Plenty of folks have loads of junk hanging around the basement, attic, garage, packed into closets, crammed into glove compartments, shoved into the back of cupboards, you name it. Here's the question though, what do you actually do with all that stuff? Enter Antiques Roadshow, a series that has unearthed all kinds of hidden treasures over the years, from rare pocket watches to vintage jazz posters to masterwork paintings and more. When the Roadshow crew stopped in the tiny 6,000-person town of Shelburne, Vermont in July 2022, manuscript appraiser Devin Eastland took a look at what she called a rather skinny, ratty-looking volume that seller Mike pulled from a box. Mike's grandfather had collected books during his life and eventually passed his collection along to his family. The book, it turns out, was nothing less than a 1655 edition of William Shakespeare's monumental play King Lear, printed in quarto format, which means the paper is folded once, then again into a small size. UK auctioneers Sotheby's sold the book in 1946 for £28. Eastland subsequently appraised it at $10,000 to $15,000. When the bidding finally ended, however, the quarto had sold for a staggering $57,500. William Shakespeare wrote and collaborated on about 38 plays during his life. Henry VI Part 2 was his first play to be performed from 1590 to 1591. Meanwhile, all of his big, well-known tragedies, such as Hamlet, Macbeth, Othello, and King Lear, came later. King Lear itself was probably written sometime after 1603 and first performed in 1608.
Better thou hadst not been born than not to have pleased me better.
Shakespeare died in 1616, and by 1623, the first collected volume of his works, known as the First Folio, was published. The edition of King Lear from Antiques Roadshow came 32 years later in 1655. The quarto format was a smaller, cheaper paperback edition of the original folio, and this one was in pretty bad shape. Eastland says that the Quarto seller, Mike, had kept King Lear on a shelf with a few other 17th century books that he owned. The book's binding was failing, its cover page was frayed, and it felt like it was going to fall apart when handled. And yet, even taking such a poor condition into account, Eastland valued King Lear at $10,000 to $15,000. Not only are Quarto editions less common, but the publisher, Jane Bell, was a woman, which was incredibly rare for the time. Besides, the book could be restored. In fact, Eastland herself restored it in the end, which helped it sell for such a high price at auction. While we don't know what happened to the Quarto of King Lear on Antiques Roadshow after it sold at auction, or who bought it, we know that the book provoked some frenzied bidding. Due to the item's obvious appeal, bidding quickly shot past Eastland's original valuation all the way to $20,000, $30,000, and higher. Thanks to two competing phone bidders, the final sale price hit that hugely impressive price of $57,500, of which $46,000 went to the seller. The Quarto's auction listing at Swan Auction Galleries can still be viewed today. It's noted as Lot 124, sale number 2617. The same page claims that there are 17 copies of this exact edition of King Lear kept in UK and US institutions. The publisher, Jane Bell, published 25 books from 1649 to 1661, and she might well have done so illegally. The Quarto itself is a trim 88 pages long, with some browning along the pages and a new cover that Eastland crafted, which no doubt helped attract such fervent bidders. Notably, when the Quarto hit Antiques Roadshow, it didn't actually have its original binding. It's therefore entirely possible that the book might have been extracted from some larger volume. It could also be that the book was never bound correctly to begin with and got passed around here and there before making its way to Sotheby's in London in 1946 and then across the Atlantic Ocean.